around welcome to this conversation about participation. If the third of our panelists joins us, and I'll just keep looking to Wendy, we think it's going to be quite an eclectic mix of organizations sharing their experience, but maybe I can just start by framing the conversation a little bit. As the Global Fund for Community Foundations, for the past 15 years, we've been working with partners around the world, mostly community foundations, women's funds, community proximate grant makers, organizations that are looking at and thinking about local resources. And so we've been looking really at the participation on the doing side, but also participation on the resourcing side. So looking at kind of participatory models of giving as well as deciding. And I don't know about you, but for me, participation is one of those words that if you say it too many times, or you hear it too many times, it begins to lose its meaning. And it is a word that gets used a lot in the philanthropy and international development sector. Both participation in terms of kind of building collective action, you know, the growing a bigger us, but also participation of those in spaces which are not normally accessible to them. So participation across power differentials. And when we were thinking about this meeting and this word, we really wanted to reach broadly, quite far into our network to bring together some voices from parts of the system that maybe don't normally connect with each other. So we have at least two speakers today, hopefully a third one, joining us from Poland, from the United States, and from Somalia, Kenya, talking about some work in Somalia. And coming from different parts of the system as well. So from the origins in feminist philanthropy, origins in the humanitarian aid sector, and origins in the kind of the historic kind of trajectory of philanthropy development in the United States, and specifically around the Community Foundation. So I've asked each of our speakers just to prepare some initial comments and thoughts about what participation means to them, but also to start off by just sharing a little bit about their organizations and where they fit into the ecosystem. So our first speaker is Justyna Friedrich, who's with the Feminist Fund in Poland. This is an organization that we've been delighted to accompany over the last few years, and in my mind, one of the most exciting partners in our network, in that you have an idea and you implement, and in wonderful and experimental ways, both on the participating in and participating around how you resource. So Justyna, can I pass to you and get us started? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny, so much for this introduction, and thank you, Wendy and Jenny, for your invitation. I'm very happy to be here and to be able to share with you our perspective. My name is Justyna, and I'm one of the co-founder and a member of grant-making team of the Feminist Fund from Poland. FemFund was set up 4 years ago in like this context of huge backlash against women's rights in Poland. And we are actually the only grant-making organization in Poland that focuses on supporting grassroots feminist groups and organizations, and on developing feminist philanthropy to mobilize independent, flexible, friendly resources. And maybe I will give you a brief introduction and context of our work. I'm not sure if we have enough time, but yeah, I will try to be brief. In 2015, the extremely conservative and far-right wing parties seized power in Poland, and actually since then, the space for human rights has been rapidly shrinking. For several years, feminist organizations have been completely cut from public funding, and they experience smear campaigns. There have been a number of attempts to limit women's rights, for instance, to impose a total ban on abortion in Poland. And grassroots groups and thousands of individual women played actually a critical role in this massive mobilization all over Poland in 2016 during this black protests against the government's attempts to limit women's rights. And this mobilization of feminists has been actually growing, and now courageous informal feminist initiatives have been mushrooming, I would say. And women's rights movement becomes massive and more influential. So on one hand, there are these serious threats to women's rights and basically no funding for feminist organizations. And on the other hand, there is this unique opportunity to build powerful and feminist movement in Poland. And that's why the establishment of FemFund was needed and critical. And we believe that its impact on feminist movement goes far beyond, resisting the current backlash. So I've mentioned already that there are two main areas of our work. It's grant making and it's resource mobilization. And at the moment, there are 4 different programs within our grant making. We offer mini grants. We offer renewals, kind of 3 years cooperation for former grantees. We offer rapid response grants, and we offer core support. So these are three different programs, and our grants are devoted to women and trans-led feminist organizations, and also to informal collectives. However, we have our priorities. We focus on marginalized communities, especially those acting at movement intersections, for instance, on LGBTQ persons, refugee women, migrant women, women with disabilities, or women from rural areas, and so on. And in most of our programs, actually apart from rapid response, decisions are made in a participatory way, and the procedure is based on the participatory model inspired by Frida, the Young Feminist Fund. I'm not sure if you are familiar with this organization and its model. It means that the decisions are actually taken mostly by the co-applicants, and they actually choose among themselves. So maybe I've been already talking for some. Can I take a few minutes more? Yes, sorry, yes.
Please do. I mean, particularly, I think if you come to the participation piece,
exactly.
because I think it's next.
Yes, why participation? So I will maybe start with this, like answering this question, why. We perceive participatory grant making as a tool, I would say, and it is the tool that comes directly from our values, from our vision of FemFund's role in the feminist movement, and from our goals. It means that, this tool is, I would say, rather secondary to our values, to our vision, to our goals. And this tool enables us to be close to our values, such as, for instance, changing power relations, fair access to resources, mutual trust, collective decision-making, trust in the movement's wisdom, horizontal responsibility. So we believe that it's not, for instance, us, or I don't know, external experts who know what are the needs of feminist movement, but it's the feminist community itself, it's grassroots activists and organizations who actually know best what is needed, and it's them who should, decide. But we also believe in solidarity, in cooperation. We believe, in mutual support, importance of, developing close relationships within the feminist movement, importance of developing bonds within the community. We also believe in radical inclusiveness and, kind of attentiveness, I would say. And we also perceive constant learning as a value. We are okay with, for instance, I don't know, like experiments or making mistakes, if it's connected with curiosity, with critical thinking, this readiness to change. Participatory grant making also comes directly from our vision of FemFund's role, in the feminist movement, and we see our tasks more like, I would say, collecting money for feminist activism and, passing it on where it's needed, rather than, deciding. Yeah, it's rather passing money than deciding on when the money should go. We also try to connect, people, connect groups with each other, as part of the feminist movement. We believe in strengthening relationships, fostering solidarity and inclusiveness, and that's where we see our role. And we see our role also in developing alternative, I would say, less hierarchical ways of, just doing things. And finally, participatory grant making is just a tool to reach, our goals. I would say that these goals go far beyond, distributing money and, for instance, implementing projects. We want to make space, to getting to know each other, learning about other feminist activists, about their values, their approaches, the challenges they face. We also want to build solidarity and empathy, I would say maybe understanding, within the feminist movement and different actors of the feminist movement to build bridges. We also want to make space for marginalized groups and marginalized communities, and maybe empower them to be more visible, more like taken into account by the community, and just to be powerful. We also want to, by using this model, we want to initiate deeper discussion within both within the feminist movement itself, but also within small groups, our co-applicants, about values, about understanding of feminism, about the diversity of the feminist movement, also about different positions we have in this movement. And finally, we want to build really powerful, resilient, diverse, but also solidary feminist movement by using this tool. So maybe I will stop here, and later I can share, more about how it looks like, how the process looks like. But I see that I've been talking already for quite a few minutes, so maybe I will give space.
Thank you, Justina. But before, I think that's brilliant. I love the flexible, friendly funding. So much funding isn't very friendly. I think that's just a wonderful framing that you use. I wonder if you could just take a minute to talk about, because you also have been looking at, you have very ambitious plans to grow your resource base in terms of women, people supporting your cause. Can you just say a little bit about that side of things? And I know you have an amazing ambition to kind of have this many women giving monthly by when. Can you just say a word about that? Because that's also a distinct characteristic of your work. It's not just resourcing, not premised on directing other people's resources, but it's also this idea of self-financing of movements.
Yes. So we always say that, we do both, resourcing the movement, but also collecting money and, so that the movement can be strong and actually use this money. And from the beginning, we've been developing this individual fundraising. So so far, already 200 individuals support us regularly on a monthly basis, and we put a lot of effort, so in also this fundraising area, I would say, so that the movement can be independent from external donors, and so that the movement can actually resource itself. We have quite ambitious plans, that's true. We hope that within the next 7 years, I would say, yes, 7 years, we will be fully independent, and we need to work on it for sure. But we also observe that there is a huge link between, I would say, solidarity we try to build within the movement and this willingness to support us. So the more we are visible, the more groups we support, the more bridges are built between different groups, the more persons are eager to share their resources, their money with FemFund. And we also noticed that our community is not divided, you know, there are no, like, these groups are not separate, I would say. So there are grantee partners who are our donors at the same time. There are applicants who are our donors at the same time. And we noticed that, you know, I don't know, like being close to our values and reaching, you know, putting a lot of effort into communication and outreach brings also not only like more initiatives which need support, but also it results in more and more individual donors. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. I think it's just so powerful, that idea of the sort of circularity of who's a donor, who's a receiver, who's a donor, and actually what you're doing is building the networks, the ecosystems in which you work. Thank you so much, Justina. I can see that Suleiman has joined, but I will let him pause for breath. So Clotilde, is it all right if I travel from Poland over to Buffalo, New York in the United States, and you share while Suleiman gets himself organized? Thank you, Clotilde.
Absolutely. Good morning, Jenny, and thank you, Justina. It's I'm struck by the similarities of our work in such different contexts. So I'm Clotilde Perez-Bodie Decker. I'm President and CEO of the Community Foundation for Greater Buffalo, and we're one of the old ones, right? We're 102 years old. We're in Buffalo, New York, which is at the complete opposite end of New York State from New York City in many ways, literally and figuratively. We are the third poorest large city in the United States, so our challenges are significant. And our foundation understands that addressing the complex challenges that our community is facing far and away exceeds the reach, certainly of our organization, but frankly, of any one organization, government agency, or foundation, or NGO in our community. It's just the real problems and the root causes of these problems are a level of complexity that they're beyond any one person or one organization's reach. So that we have stepped into the role of convener and facilitator of cross-sector collaborative efforts to co-create solutions. Now, when I say cross-sector, depending on the issue, it almost always involves government and the public sector as a partner, that most often they are the problem, not the solution, but they would love to be the solution in our case. And so working with them can be very helpful in mutually reinforcing to our goals. Business and employers and corporate, they also want to be part of solutions, and of course the NGO and foundation sector. But very importantly, we do our work through the lens of race equity, which is an organizational priority and a very significant challenge and issue in our country. And we center the voice of residents with lived experience. That time and again, we've been doing this work for 20 years. Time and again is the secret sauce to breakthrough solutions. And there's an African proverb that paraphrases something along the lines of, "He who wears the shoes knows where they pinch." And, you know, it couldn't be truer in our experience. Citizen participation and that lived experience is central to informing all of our work, starting with our organizational strategy. So when the foundation engages in a regular strategy cycle discussion and evaluation, we always begin with engaging the community through various methodologies to learn about the issues and solutions that are important to them. That's the starting point. And it hasn't failed us yet. In fact, it's been prescient in terms of the challenges that have emerged over the years. Then we engage the power of process. It doesn't sound sexy, but the power of process is our religion, if you will. We are currently working on several systems, and we define a system as a set of stakeholders that impact a given issue, including the very central role of the residents with lived experience, people who are currently experiencing those systems and know better than anyone where they can be improved and where they present actual barriers to the objectives of those systems. So just to give you a sense of the systems, we're working on juvenile justice, reentry from incarceration, education reform, and youth employment. Those are just some of the ones we're working on. We're actually working on 12. And for each of these systems, this is what the power of process looks like. We convene the key stakeholders, government, corporate, NGO, and center lived experience. And that is step one. That is something we as community philanthropy are uniquely positioned to do. Then together, we map the issue, starting with the knowledge and understanding of everyone who's around that same table. And it's amazing how the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. It's consistent, right? Everyone touches the elephant in a different place and everyone's right? The trunk feels and looks one way, the tail another, the leg another, the body another, but no one's got the full beast. So we map that system so that we all start with a common understanding, and we set out to learn together. Shared learning is a powerful initial start to building relationships. Best practices, hearing from experts, hearing from peers in other cities that have attempted similar work. So that all informs the mapping that leads to setting shared goals. And those are done through consensus. What is it that we want to accomplish? What will success look like in 3 to 5 years? So in our lifetime, what can we accomplish to address what we've learned about the barriers and the opportunities for addressing the challenges that are embedded, and in our case, a lot of structural racism embedded in these systems. And then we go from there to develop action plans to achieve those shared goals. Tremendous ownership is built throughout that process. And that ownership is essential to then doing the hard work of implementing the change. And the beauty of it is that everyone who needs to change is in the room. So that, ideally the strategic convening up front is really critical, that you want the people who have the power. It's never philanthropy, and grants don't buy change, right? This is not at the systemic level. They do at the individual level and at the organizational capacity level. So we want to make sure that we have a clear set of change strategies that have been built through consensus. So we convene, we map and learn, we plan and implement, and then throughout it, it's a continuous learning and monitoring loop of how are we doing against process. So we set up the meetings. What's our role? We schedule the meetings. We take good notes. Back in the day when we used to meet in person, we served great meals, hot breakfast, hot lunch, hot dinner, to make it easy for people to do what none of them have to do. And we're very sensitive to scheduling all that work around the workable schedules of the residents with lived experience who aren't professionals in these systems, right? They're participants or being served clients of this system. And it's all done by consensus. It takes a lot of time. And it takes a lot of strategic space making, right? It's really making that safe space for these strange bedfellows to come together and do work that is difficult to do and hear and learn. And what happens is that the power of process, as I call it, builds trust through proximity. When you sit and work and learn and plan and debate and discuss with people over a period of 1, 2, 3 years, some of these initiatives are now 10 years in with some real transformational outcomes, you actually get to the currency of social change. And the currency of social change, just as Justina just mentioned, is relationships. When you get those relationships and solid, authentic relationships built on shared experience, shared learning, shared listening, you now have rewoven and strengthened the fabric of community to be able to now do the hard work of change, of social change. So it really is a powerful methodology. We do make grants, we do research, we do public education, we are engaged in public policy related, all of this to these initiatives, but that power of process really builds community and relationships that will far outlast our involvement in a given change effort. So I'll stop there and happy to take any questions when we come to that point.
Thank you, Clotilde. Brilliant. I love the he who knows the shoes and where they pinch. I'm going to borrow that actually. Anyone else is welcome to as well. I just want to follow up with a couple of questions. So as you say, you know, the Greater Buffalo Community Foundation is more than 100 years old. And we know that community foundations, there are many community foundations in the United States, and it's easy when if you're raising money within the community, and if a large amount of that money has historically come from those with wealth, just even without you noticing it, to tilt towards that center of power. And I think, you know, it's a balancing act that one has to kind of take. So what precipitated and when did the Greater Buffalo Community Foundation, because what you've done is really, you've marked your kind of place in the system around this whole thing around racial equity. When did that happen and what precipitated it? Was it to do with that the outcomes of the foundation weren't as good as you thought they could be because you were missing something, or how can you say a word about that?
Sure, absolutely. So the short answer is a board doing its job. That's the short answer. The bit longer answer is we were on the eve of our 90th birthday. And so it was we were 87 years old, and we're beginning to plan, you know, like most people do for milestone birthdays and anniversaries, you begin to reflect, you know, did it matter? And what we learned, it was a very sort of sobering moment, I would say, that for 87 years, we had been focused on growing assets so that we could do more good, right? And what had happened is that the macro indicators in the community had continued to go in the wrong direction, all the while we were doing good. So the board had a moment of pause, and we made what now in retrospect, this was 17 years ago, was a radical shift. We shifted the paradigm from focusing on growing assets to do good to growing impact. And the virtuous cycle of philanthropy, I'll give you some numbers to back up how this worked. It was a huge risk, right? We also named the goals we informed by residents, the goals we were going to commit to over time. And it's counterintuitive, but the moment you focus, you actually expand the opportunities to make a difference, right? Because you go deeper, you learn more, and you can be more. So we focused on impact, and the theory was that if you focus on impact, then you will be more relevant, then you will have more visibility, and as a result, you will grow assets to drive even more impact. Now, let me talk about assets, because when we hear the word assets in the same line with philanthropy or foundation, we think money, right? But I will go to my grave arguing that the most important asset we have as leaders of social change, because that's what everyone on this call is engaged in, is time, because it is the only limited asset we all have, right? So how we use our time strategically is number one. When I say discretionary assets, there are three. Number two is our influence, how we activate our networks of influence and how we connect with and activate other networks of influence. Because you know, you can only go to the well so many times. So you have to be, again, very strategic on how you leverage influence towards which goals. And then thirdly, not insignificant, but third in the top three is funding, because that's kind of the gas in the tank, if you will, once you've got a good tank to run the car, a good engine. So those have been really important learnings. So when we started this shift, we were $150 million. Now remember, we were almost 90 years old, one of the first of 800 community foundations in the US. So 87 years, $150 million. We then shifted to focus on impact rather than assets. And in the last 17 years, we are now at $750 million. So the shift towards making a difference for our community through partnerships and collaboration actually unleashed asset growth because people want to be a part of big, bold transformation and ideas.
Wow, I'm just looking at the names and countries represented on this call. I think many people are joining from very small organizations who constantly feel they don't have resources because they don't have money, and yet in their heart of hearts know that they have resources because they have community and connection. And it's just great to hear this sort of story of a community foundation reversing up, if you like, and then deliberately taking a different kind of a route. I wanted to ask you one more quick question. I think Suleiman is running around trying to find a Wi-Fi connection somewhere, poor chap. So I wanted to ask you one more thing, Suleiman, Clotilde, and then we will open up the conversation for sharing your own experiences. I can see there's some comments in the chat or any questions you want to have, but this is a conversation for all of us and it's meant to be useful. And I'm very aware that we have people from community-based organizations, from the humanitarian aid sector, from philanthropy. And what I've come to understand over the last few years about systems changes, this is what we need. We need this diversity, because I'm sure many of you sitting in a kind of aid-dependent environment will hear what Clotilde is saying. Actually, we're told we don't have time. Everything has to be done in 2 years and presented with a ribbon on it, and change is supposed to have happened. And you're saying, actually, we need to take the longer-term view. So Clotilde, my one other question to you, and maybe, I don't know if Justina wants to comment on it too. When you're talking about centering the voices of residents with lived experience at the heart of your work, what are the strategies, what are the methodologies, what are the ways of being that you have learned? Because people who've never been invited into those rooms and coming into them, and I'm thinking of the kind of, you know, typically for communities, whether in Asia or Africa, who never actually get to see where the money comes from, and just get delivered something or not, and they may like it or not. So just how do you manage that issue of power, that issue of confidence, that issue of getting people to really be the best version of themselves so that they can really contribute to get to that point where everyone can see each other as people? What are some of the things that you've learned along the way about that? And maybe Justina, you want to reflect on it, and then folks, it's over to you, okay?
Sure, there is no one way, because it depends on who you're trying to reach and what their preferred approach of participation is. And there's only one way to learn that, and that's to ask through trusted messengers, which is typically not a foundation in our context. So, for example, for the Youth Employment Coalition, we want to center youth voice. Well, they're not going to come to a boardroom. Let's put COVID aside, pretending we would have regular meetings. It is just not, that is, you are undermining their authenticity and their comfort level by putting them in a fish out of water, right? So eventually, you know, that may happen, but so we, because we were limited through, this was earlier this year, we had a Zoom call on a day off from school. We had near peer mentors through organizations that work with youth, and particularly youth that are challenged by poverty. Really, that's the population. And we created small breakout rooms. The whole thing was mobile accessible because they all have cell phones. We had a fabulous DJ, so that's the kind of stuff we funded to open up the session. We promoted gift cards for local vendors to honor their time and contribution as having value. And then we had a lot of small group. It's very intimidating to speak to a screen full of faces you don't know, even if there are other young people. So we had a lot of breakout facilities, and all of them were facilitated by a youth peer with an adult without a face, just a name on the screen. So those are just examples of one population. It was phenomenal. In terms of success. In fact, we had to close down the registration. So that's one example. When we want to hear from families in neighborhoods, we go to those neighborhoods and we provide at a local community center, at a local restaurant, a nice dinner and childcare so that families can come and it can be a family affair. We remove barriers to participation. Depending on who you're trying to engage in participation, you first plan it with representatives of that group to get it right without assuming.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
And I think ultimate, you mentioned power, Jenny.
Yeah.
So the ultimate devolution of power, we call it cascading power, is we do all the work and they make all the decisions.
Nice.
That's as simple as that. Our board is putting in about $500,000 a year in these initiatives, and they have no say other than the end, right? Which is to strengthen, pathways for 16 to 24-year-old disconnected opportunity youth to enter high demand careers. That's the goal. And all decisions on how we get there are made by the people, the partners, over 60 partners in the Youth Employment Coalition, including the young people who are leading and shaping the strategies and solutions that will work for them. So that's the ultimate power transition.
Yeah.
They decide.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Justina, do you want to
Yeah.
react to that?
Yeah, thank you so much, Clotilde, for sharing. I feel that we have a lot of in common, yeah, and see lots of similarities. Actually, it's also one of our main challenges, I would say, one of the main challenges we face now. And I totally agree that, this model, like participation and, different models of participation, different tools we use, I mean, it's not enough, and it's something more than, just, the tool. It's also a lot of, communication work, this constant contact with the community, awareness about, diverse different groups that are in our community. Also the ones that are not visible and the ones that are not obvious, right? Especially the ones on the margins and those who are not who do not feel invited, to be a part of the community, who are ignored, for instance. Of course, our role is to, reach them, to make them feel invited, to make them feel important, but also to make them feel comfortable in the community once they already are there, right? And that's one of our challenges, because, for instance, we noticed that we use participatory grant making, and our model is based on voting by co-applicants. But what we notice is that although we communicate our values and we put a lot of effort in communication and outreach, we notice that even if the marginalized groups are apply for the grants and they are already there, we notice that they are not, the choices of the community are more conservative, I would say. So they are usually not, they are not among the first choices of the co-applicants. And what is interesting is that we analyzed the choices, we analyzed the results of different calls for proposals, and we noticed that it's both like the community votes in a, I would say, conservative way for more like mainstream initiatives, but also the marginalized groups vote for mainstream initiatives. They don't vote for groups similar to them, for instance, right? Or for the ones who are who act on the margins of the feminist movement. Yes, so now we are like in a kind of process of deep, I would say, evaluation of our approach, and we actually identified a few, I would say, possible reasons for such, situation, I would say, yes. And we know that we need to put like more effort, to make sure that our that FemFund is accessible to everyone. I will maybe just give you an example that we had like before launching our first call for proposals, we had no idea about deaf feminists in Poland. And in the second call for proposals, we've decided to translate our call and to translate our invitation and the rules into Polish Sign Language. And it turned out that, you know, in the second call for proposals, we had already 2 applications from deaf feminists, and they joined our community. But we also see that, you know, we are also aware that there are some limitations of our model. For instance, the grantees, the co-applicants, they vote, right? But they don't see the other choices. So they don't see the full picture, right? They just see, you know, very small, you know, part of the whole process, and they have no space for sharing, actually, for, you know, discussion, for you know, coming to some conclusion. So we are like noticing that it can be a barrier as well. And I will maybe just add that it's like with participation and with this tool, it's like it's similar to, you know, availability. It's like not enough to organize events, you know, for instance, in a place accessible to people with disabilities, right? Because they won't take part in it, you know. It's not enough to implement a tool. Participation requires this like communication and constant contact with the community, and, you know, like this active search for those who feel marginalized. Yeah, just thank you.
Thank you, Justina. It reminds me of, I've been reading a lot about trees during lockdown, visiting trees. And this idea that, trees need deep roots to be able to stand and to grow. But what makes trees really, what really nourishes trees is the mycorrhizal fungi. You know, it's these fungi that have been around for 500 million years, which activate the ends of the roots. Yeah. So I think what you're saying, Justina, it's not good enough just to kind of reach out. You need to have that capacity in a community to activate that sort of social muscle. And I think that speaks also to what Clotilde was saying about the trusted messengers. And I mean, I think the observation around how people make decisions when they get the chance to decide is presumably also to do with their sense of their own legitimacy and where they fit. Absolutely. And how they belong, and building that trust and social capital. And the point you make about, you know, what happens when people make decisions that maybe we don't like, is one of these things that one must grapple with. I'm going to open it up now. I can see on this call that we've got amazing people who are building philanthropy, who are using participatory approaches. So I can see there's Tara, I think you add a question which I didn't mean to ask, but I realize I asked on your behalf, but I don't know if you want to add to that. Vera is saying the main asset is the community. When you don't have money at all, you have to start with the community, because that's your only asset. To various other comments, but if you want to jump in or pop a question in the chat, I think Suleiman is really struggling with connection. I think he's running around Nairobi feeling all stressed. But yes, Tara, what do you want to kick us off? And do you want to introduce yourself and say where you're joining from?
Hi, I am in Asheville, North Carolina, and I work with the United Way here of Asheville and Buncombe County in the US. And I work with community partners to strengthen the local relationships that have been built and damaged over time due to, as you might see in my photo, 100 years in the community here. We, as an organization, have actively and unintentionally, I think most of the time, hurt some of those communities that we were trying to help by not taking a participatory approach and not including those who are most affected by our decisions and by our work in those processes of actually trying to seek solutions to the many issues that plague our community. And I wanted to ask Clotilde if she had any experience as they built these relationships, and I love the point about the participation and the actual process building those relationships. But did, as an organization, they need to do any kind of repair building within their community? Do they need to actually not just seek out people where they're most comfortable in ways that were accessible, but actually go a step further to repair harm that had been done through ignoring people in those participatory practices, or the grant making arm that they have? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Tara. That's a great question and a very real issue. And so we have worked through intermediaries. So for example, I'll keep using one example to not muddy the water, the youth employment work that we're doing on the youth employment system. This youth employment work has 3 co-chairs, and the 3 co-chairs are of and from the community. So we are very much behind the scenes. We work for, it's a servant leadership role. They lead. One of the 3 co-chairs is a near peer. So they come to the leadership. So we're not at the head of the table. They come to the leadership with established, authentic relationships in the communities that we are hoping to engage. So that's how we step into the work. We don't carry the flag. We make sure there is a flag for someone to carry, and we support so that we ensure that the leadership, to the degree possible, is of and from community. So in that process, they become acquainted with our organization and know and begin and then experience the servant leadership role, which is a support role as opposed to a power over role.
Thanks, Clotilde. I can see we've got colleagues from the START network, which is just at the beginning of your journey to create local funds. I don't know, I didn't mean to jump on you, Bhavya, but to me, it struck me that as systems like the humanitarian aid system are starting to think about what would local level trusted organizations that can facilitate resources and people look like. I wonder what strikes you when you're hearing Clotilde and Justina speak, or any reflections from your experience at the network. And maybe you want to introduce the network to those that don't.
Sure. Thanks, Jenny. Love to see you again. I'm Bhavya, and I work with the START network, which is basically a humanitarian network. We have over 50 organizations across the world. So it's a combination of big, large NGOs and smaller sort of local national NGOs in different contexts and regions and countries. And we are on a change process ourselves, where we're trying to sort of move away from a centralized sort of UK-based network to becoming one of a distributed network of networks. So sort of building on the success or on the strength of being a network itself, in thinking about how you can leverage influence, resource, reach, etc., of working in a networked way, and how it's a peer mechanism, and sort of getting to a place where we're shifting power to say, like, actually, the whole humanitarian system is not fit for purpose anymore in sort of reacting to need that's coming up through the humanitarian system in terms of humanitarian crises, and sort of moving towards a more locally led system. And in doing so, we sort of have encountered a lot of the stuff that you were talking about. And I think the one thing that really strikes me is in terms of what you were saying, in being supportive and being that servant leadership. I think what we're struggling with is that we still, while we want to be doing that, and we're trying to understand what that means and how we get there, there is a whole conversation about risk and accountability that sort of like creeps into the conversation, which sort of goes back into the old ways of working, of like the board needing to control certain aspects of how things are done. And so I wonder, like, just from your experience, like, how did you shift that? Like, how did the board become more sort of take on that role of being more led by other leaders, which is quite a tricky sort of role to play when they're being held accountable for certain types of things.
Thanks, Bhavya. And I think Stuart from the Community Foundation of the Western Region of Zimbabwe is also asking that in the chat, like, how do you deal with accountability, particularly to funders who don't get it? And maybe in your cases, you've already sold it and you've only worked with funders who get it, but so others might have insights to share. But Clotilde, Justina, and anyone else who wants to contribute at this stage, please.
I would say it's the answer in short is slowly. And make sure that the board has authority at the appropriate level. What's the goal the board wants to see? High level. So I'll use the youth employment example one more time. And that is, we want the unemployment rates for youth in our city are nearing 30% for 16 to 24-year-olds that are out of school and unemployed. So, and in the meantime, we have a private sector that desperately needs talent. So we need to bridge that gap. And so the board needs to focus on identifying and making the tough decisions on what is the change we want to see. Name the change, informed by resident voice and informed by data and statistics and trends. Then their role switches to one of monitoring. Now, if there are some board members that want to be at the table with the community and the stakeholders, they can be, but they're there as one more voice. They don't have extra authority and they have to do the work. So you don't get to mandate if you're not in the room doing the work. And then, so that's a slow, so monitoring and communicating to the board, the progress, the indicators of progress around the process. People vote with their feet. Are people showing up? What was accomplished at any given meeting? What kind of training was provided to the group? Blah, 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 blah. And then when they begin to see the outcomes, it's a very easy conversation to have because they immediately intuit and understand that those are not outcomes that could have been achieved without the right people making the decisions. So that takes a little bit to get there. This is long-term work with urgency. And funders need to just be told that. This is, if you really want these outcomes, do you really think you're going to get it in a 3-year grant? It's ridiculous. So this is long-term work, and you do it with urgency and strategic focus.
Thanks, Clotilde. What strikes me hearing you speak is we just need to leverage other parts of the system. What is true in Clotilde's world is not true. Of course, you can achieve things in 3 years to time, and then another 3 years, and then be surprised why things haven't worked. But I mean, it's and there's a sort of irony that, you know, the United States is in the donor part of the system if you're in the humanitarian side of it, and yet what's going on in the backyard in the United States is not being applied in what's being done through the international process. So I think the real opportunity to do some kind of organizing and influencing and case making. I know we have Beulah Fredericks here, far away in the tip of Africa. Beulah, are you there? I wondered if you wanted to share a word or two about how you sort of see participation or any responses to colleagues on this call there in Cape Town in South Africa.
Hello, Jenny, and hello, everyone. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. You know, when I was listening to Justina and to Clotilde, I thought, I must run away. This is not for me, you know, and I just, you know, and then I was listening and I became so, wanted to go in a dark place because I saw our challenges. I saw, no, we don't have that money. No, we don't have that stuff. No, we don't have. And I went into this, no, we don't. And then in a calm way, I said, yes, yes, we do have time. Yes, we do have influence. Yes, we do. And then I felt much more I think I had to pause. So thank you, Clotilda and Justina, for this presentation and to being that so powerful. Where I sit as a community development foundation in Cape Town, of course, we don't have the kind of what you talk, but we do have people. We have the reputable capital of that relationships that we build over many years. And now you've just affirmed that. I, of course, would not put time and influence and funding in my circle first. I will put people first. And with people, then the time, and I like the influence bit that you talk about, because I think we undervalue that we have the influence many a times. And we can only do that because, and Jenny, you know that my whole pet about listening, that we must listen more and listen more. And you know, I can tell you a story a few years ago when we went into what we call, when we addressed the issue of hunger in our, but if you know the favelas in Brazil, we talk about townships here. I had a community conversation in one of our township communities. And when I went in, sitting under a tree to listen to burning issues, there was this death silence. Because the notion was that I'm coming in with something, either coming in with money or ideas or to solve the issue. So imagine that quietness. I shut up and everybody else was waiting. And that was the paradigm shift in terms of the work that I had to do, to say that we don't have it. And you, Clotilda, reminded us again about it, that the community, and I like what you said, well, I like that if you wear the shoe, you know where it pinch. The community knows that. They know their fault lines in their community and they have the answers. But it's just to give them the power to listen, that here we are to listen to your voice and what is your expectations and what is it. And we were just the facilitator or the connector, and that we don't own the outcome in that sense. And I've learned then money comes, it follows. Maybe longer time. I always said when we do a funding proposal, we've just been here, there's a process, and the process is, it is not a 3-year process necessarily, or a 5 years process. So that is what I've learned. And you know, we've been busy for a while on what we call the giving circles as a way of how community at the local level can participate. And what did COVID learn us? Because we didn't call it the community circle giving, but because giving or help is in our communities. During the COVID, the deep lockdown of level 5, 4, and 5, self-organizing didn't come from government level. It was communities that took responsibility for that. So I think for me, where I sit, it was very heartwarming to say, yes, we're not in the shape that you are talking, Clotilda, or that, but we have those are the possibilities of people, time, influence, and the funding. So thank you for that. Yeah, and I think as the foundation, that we should not lose hope, that we can continue to build on that, you know. And I really want to carry the flag of listening and listening more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beulah. Beulah is one of the first times I met Beulah many years ago. She described how her approach to engaging communities was, you turned up basically with a packet of tea bags and said, has anyone got the hot water? And then you just take it from there. But I also remember the long conversations we've had in the past, Beulah, about whether, you know, the extent to which one tries to measure hope as a metric, or the lack of hope, even just getting people to start thinking that they might have a voice and a view, that you know, just actually that whole getting people to see about themselves differently. Justina, please.
Yes, you just reminded me this conversation about hope. Thank you. Thank you, Beulah, for sharing your perspective and also for emphasizing that there are people, and that's like the main, I would say, resource we have. I also wanted to stress that that is also our approach. Like it was our approach from the beginning. Like we knew that like when we were like starting the fund 4 years ago, we had actually basically like one institutional donation and nothing more, like no, you know, visibility, no, nothing, I would say, no contacts. But we started to collect people's needs, and it turned out quite quickly that, you know, the broader community, the feminist community in Poland, is not aware of people's needs, right? So that the community is not even aware that there are some, you know, different groups that might have I would say unexpected for, you know, unobvious for other parts of the community needs, right? So we started to collect the individual stories, like we started to collect stories of women living in rural areas, women with disabilities, you know, deaf women, for instance, or elderly women, and we started to communicate about these needs. And it turned out that suddenly, you know, the first, like a big part of the first call for proposals was of the first, of the budget for first mini grants we had. It was financed in the end, like the big part was financed by the community, which was actually surprised that, you know, there are so many women with this feminist identity and such you know, important like needs, you know, that should be met. Yeah. So yeah, that was also our experience, that, you know, having people turned out to be our most, I would say, powerful weapon. Yeah.
Thanks, Justina. I think that really also speaks to that it's not just, you know, if you're talking about shifting power, moving decision-making from group A to group B also needs to be on top of the issues too. And you need to kind of create the conditions in which actually people can listen and hear and see themselves and each other in relation to each other. And that, you know, it's not just a simple, okay, the money will go from, instead of going here, it will now go here, and then we've solved everything. I think that is very clear from what you've shared as well. Any other comments? I think Wendy, Suleiman, we've had no joy. Suleiman was going to talk about this new fund, which is just being established in Somalia, grounded in sort of principles of community philanthropy, but in a very, very kind of complex environment. And cooked up in a completely different part of the world and different part of the ecosystem. So we'll have to make another plan to come back to that in the future. But yes, any other comments, experiences, questions?
Julie, may I just come in again?
Beulah, please.
Yeah, you know, can I just, you know, last week we took 30 women out, and they are really the leaders in our community, and they come from different, very marginalized communities. So we thought as a form of participatory grant making, meaning that what is it that you can bring to the table, because the need came from the community, this group of 30 women, that 2020 has been such a hard year, and 2021 wasn't that different, and we haven't been in touch, and it's because before what happened, before Omicron, we could do that. So everybody helped, and we could go to a park, you know, on a beautiful day. But what was very interesting from the staff around me and our community leaders was about the program. And it was like, what is it we're going to do for the day? What is going to be the program, and what? Other than that we will picnic, but there's going to be a program. And, you know, and because I talk about dealing with listening, dealing with silence, the fact when I didn't do anything, I just decided go with the flow. There was at the beginning an uneasiness, and then when I told them, you know what, it was intentional not to have a program. That we are so focused on programs and this outcomes and in our work that we kind of forget the human side of our work, to be in touch with nature, to be in touch with silence, to be in touch with. And afterwards, when they realize that it said it's more of that what we need, so that we can propel and do the good work. And what I say, and I think Clotilda mentioned it when you made before your 100th anniversary made a change, that to also shift from well-doing to a bit more well-being. Because if we are stronger within, we can do the work out there. So I think it's that shift that I'm working very hard at, that we are doing good work. We know that. We are responsible, we are accountable, we have all of that, but we do too less of well-being work. So that's why I will call listening out. I will shout for hope. I will shout for all the non-tangibles that, and I thank the Global Fund for kind of also giving me the space to talk about listening and hope and things like that. Because I think that's where also we must really get more support of the donor community. That's part of the collective work. If you talk participation and collective and empowerment and all the kind of things that you want to see. Thank you.
Thanks, Beulah. Anyone else I want to share their experiences of trying to work in more participatory ways? What's gone well, what you're trying? Victoria, nice to see you, please. Victoria, you need to unmute.
Yeah,
there we go.
Hi, sorry, I couldn't control my computer. I don't know if it's really relevant. Hello, everyone. It's really lovely to be in such an international environment and learning lots, as usual, with the Global Fund Community Foundation events. In Italy, it has just become mandatory by law to engage in participatory processes. It has been inserted into the third sector code, whereby public bodies are obliged to work with, first of all, with third sector parties, so foundation, cooperatives, associations, volunteers, but also with communities to develop educational, social, and health services in a more shared way, and that is in a way that is more respondent to the needs of the community. It has also been made a condition to access the European COVID recovery funds. So it goes a bit against the grain of what we've been saying today, but it has taken best practices from all over Italy, from the more forward-thinking regions of Italy, and made it a national law. So we have found ourselves in a situation whereby many of those organizations, public and private, which were kind of above us and making grants to us and more or less telling us how we had to use the money that they were giving us, are now obliged to call us and reserve a seat at the table for us and hear us out and plan with us on a more balanced kind of exchange. And this has been really interesting because we've been forced together, but in the end we've found that we really work in very similar ways and we share the same objectives. So it's been an exercise in building trust, starting from a different premise than the ones that we've heard about today. The other issue that has come about, though, at the same time, is that many third sector organizations, although they have the skills and the willingness to take part in these participatory processes, sorry, I haven't spoken English for a long time, don't have the funds. So they have skilled professionals, they have people who've been working on the ground for many years, who know the communities, who are trusted by the communities, who are often delegated by the more fragile sectors of their communities to speak at the table. But we don't actually have the money to pay the person to take part in these processes. So that has become an issue now that ties in with supporting organizations and not projects. But I would say supporting organizations and not only the I can't say it, participatory process. So yeah, this is always like a kind of more cynical approach to the problem, but also having in mind that many people are willing to take part, but they can't afford it, is an issue that is very much at the center of the conversation that we're having at the moment in Italy.
Thank you. It's interesting. It sort of speaks to lots of the, participatory budgeting, citizens' assemblies, all those sorts of things that are happening in other spaces. But Victoria, I think you raise a really important point that it's, the system can change the rules to make things better, but if it doesn't do it properly, it can create new barriers and new champions and new leaders, right? And so that whole issue of power comes back again. Bhavya, do you want to say a word? And then if there's one more comment from the group, and then I'm going to ask Justina and Clotilde to artfully sum up what we've heard today, or what you're hearing back. Any final thoughts?
I think it was just sort of building on what Victoria was sort of saying, and also what we were chatting about a few weeks ago, Jenny, in terms of like the combining the internal and external resources of like how you work with communities. And in thinking about what Victoria was just saying, like at what point though do like these externalities sort of take over? How do you make sure that there's like equity in a way, and how do you make sure the balance doesn't tip? And I think it's a question for Clotilde and Justina as well, like how much of that external funding, for instance, plays a huge power and huge role, and how do you manage that, like making sure that the internal resource that's being brought in terms of time and all of and people and influence is not sort of tipping in the direction of the funding, and how do you maintain equity there?
Great question. Who wants to go first? Justina? Oh, Clotilde's unmuted.
Well, it is, you have to hold that tension, because you have to go on the assumption that the donor, be it an individual or a foundation, wants to do the right thing. And so you therefore need to explain the approach and make sure they support the approach and understand the approach, and then regular updates on signs of life, right? How are we getting to what they wanted? And so we, as the simultaneous translators, need to walk that fine line. And yeah, there's bad funder behavior that's alive and well. We know that, but it's well intended. So it takes a lot of communication to balance and hold that tension, because at the end of the day, the relationship with funders starts from a place of shared goals. And so it really falls to us. I mean, we absolutely, we have a full-time grant writer on staff. So we are rainmakers to support in the implementation of these plans. And there's, that's a forever balance that we try to reach in service of our shared goals. So you need to go back to the shared values and the shared goals that initiated the relationship with the funder. And some funders have more flexibility than others. So that's just a fact, and part of the difficulty of doing this work with true local decision-making and power.
I would also maybe add that we are quite straight, like direct and honest with our donors and funders. And actually, I would need to say that donors coming to us with to feminist movement in Poland with their own agenda and with their own ideas were actually part of the problem, So FemFund was created in order to respond to this problem, right? So, to respond to the problem of donors who know better what is needed and who should get the money. And we are open about it, right? We are open about, our values that is, for instance, trust to the feminist community, right? So we are open about our needs. Like we need independent money, we need flexible money, we need money that is like, free of any like external agenda, free of donors' priorities, right? So I think that we have this privilege, I would say, that we can cooperate with that kind of donors who understand this approach. But I think that we put a lot of effort also in communicating our approach and explaining the reasons for such approach. So yeah, I would say that's it. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to start winding us up here, but I'm just reflecting on the last few things that you said. Well, firstly, I mean, it's clear to me that it is, you know, the voices we've heard on the call today, both from Clotilde and Justina, like we represent different parts of the system, and we should be actually pooling our relative strengths. You know, we're all grappling with the same kinds of issues, but actually where we sit is we sit in different places, and being able to grow out this conversation together so that we have stronger voices. Secondly, Clotilde, who is one of the board members of the Global Fund for Community Foundations, I'm very pleased to say, we need to basically launch Clotilde on the humanitarian aid world and the international development world, because you just say it as it is, like there's no kind of like dancing around. But at the same time, I think, Justina, your point about like, we are clear, I love the idea of an organization set up around the problem of donors, which is basically actually looking across this screen. There are many organizations set up to do the right thing in their communities, but set up as a reaction to the bad behaviors of funders. And if you start replicating that voice to say, as you said, Clotilde, people come together with the best intentions. Funders don't mean to destroy things, but sometimes they can't see what they can't see. And as you're saying, what you're doing at a community level is actually, how do we make visible what we can't see, and so that we have more assets, more resources in our community, you know, better, thicker weaves, better, stronger fabric. But if we start to do this at a more sort of systemic level, both to have that kind of political nous to say, we will do this on these terms and it's obvious, but at the same time, you know, thinking about what Beulah was saying, it's the patience, it's the listening, it's going back to remembering this is about people in the end. You know, the money is just the tool. I think that came across very clearly from both of what you said. So it does seem to me more of these unusual alliances and configurations, like we shouldn't stay in our lanes. We should no longer accept that we stay in our lanes, but the more we can kind of mix up around this at a time when the world needs this kind of thing more than ever. How we pull together and weave our own story and our own narrative and our own way of doing things becomes increasingly important. Justina and Clotilde, thank you so much for generously sharing your experience, and for everyone else for listening and participating. And if we don't see each other before the holidays, wishing you all the best for the end of the year, and let's hope. Yeah, I'm not even going to say that. Yes, 2022, it will be there, and we will continue the work because it matters, and we will do it together. So thank you so much, everybody, and we'll see you anon.
Thank you.